Hey everybody, hope that you're doing well today. Welcome to this video. This is the video for Module 34 for Business Math and Calculators. In this module, we are going to talk about simple interest. So we're going to go through several example problems that use the simple interest formula and basically talk about how to do these calculations. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so let's talk about simple interest. So let's go ahead and jump into our first problem. Pretty straightforward. We're going to calculate the simple interest for a situation where you've got $12,000, where their annual interest rate is 5.5%, and the amount is going to be in place for 3 years. So this could be a situation where you're maybe saving money into a savings account or some other investment where money interest is added to the amount that you invest over time. It could be a loan kind of situation and work in reverse where interest is money that you have to pay back because you borrowed the money. It just kind of depends on the situation. But basically what you need to know is you need to know the initial amount, which is called principal. You also need to know what the annual interest rate is, and you need to know the length of time that the money is in the account or being borrowed or whatever the situation happens to be. Now, the formula for simple interest is fairly simple. Interest is equal to the principal times the rate times the time. Now, the key thing to keep in mind with each of these values is the principal is obviously in dollars. The rate is the annual percentage rate written in decimal form. Make sure you always convert percents into a decimal. And then the time is always measured in years for this formula. So make sure that when you plug in the time, that you're making sure that you use a time that has a year's label attached to it. Now, in this situation, everything's pretty straightforward. They tell us everything we need to know to calculate the simple interest. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take 12,000 times 0.055. Again, make sure you move that decimal point exactly 2 spaces when you convert from the percent into the decimal, and then multiply that answer times 3 since it's 3 years. And when you do that, you come up with an answer of $1,980. And so that is the amount of interest that accrues in this situation. All right, $1,980. And that's the answer that we are looking for. So there you go. There's our first example of using the simple interest formula to calculate interest. All right, in the next example, again, we are going to work on a simple interest situation. This time it's a situation where we're borrowing some money. So Jill borrowed $5,000 from the bank on October 20th. The annual interest rate is 3%, and the due date for the loan is December 31st. We're gonna calculate the simple ordinary interest on the loan and the maturity value. All right, so a few things that we need to know in this problem. Number one, let's start with the simple interest formula. All right. Now, the key thing on this situation is for our time, we have to look at how many days the loan is actually out for. So you have to look at your calendar and kind of figure that out. So if we're going from October 20th to December 31st, there are 11 days left in October. There are 30 days in November and 31 days in December. So the loan is going to be out there for a total of 72 days. Now, when we go to put this into our formula, what we have to do is basically use a fraction of time because we're only talking about part of a year. The other thing that we have to be aware of is the fact that we're doing what's called ordinary interest. And with ordinary interest, what that means is rather than using 365 days in a calendar year, we're only going to use 360 days. The reason for that is it makes doing the calculations a little easier in the sense that when you think about months and weeks and all that kind of stuff, if there are roughly 30 days in a month, there's 12 months in a year, 360 gets you that's where that number comes from, essentially. So whenever you see ordinary interest, know that the number of days you're going to use when you calculate The time is 360. Now, with that being said, we're going to plug in our values into the simple interest formula. So 5,000 is the principal, 3% written as a decimal is 0.03, and then the time, because we're again always looking at what does it mean in terms of years. So out of a 360-day year, because of ordinary interest, the loan is only out there for 72 days, so we write a fraction of 72 over 360. Now it's just a matter of doing the math and multiplying things out. All right. When you do that, 5,000 times 0.03 times 72 over 360 gets us $30. So the loan accrues 30%, or excuse me, $30 in interest. And you might be like, well, that's kind of low. And it does make sense because the number of days is relatively short that Jill has borrowed the money. All right. So the amount of interest is $30. Now, the other thing we want to calculate is what's called the maturity value. So essentially, that's what Jill's going to have to pay back. So the maturity value is the initial $5,000 that she paid plus the $30 in interest that accrues. So she's going to have to pay $5,030 back in order to settle the debt with the bank. All right. So when all's said and done, like I said, she's going to pay back $5,030. That includes the principal and the interest that accrues. All right, let's look at another sample problem. Okay, this time Paul is taking out a loan at the bank. The interest rate is 2.9%. The length of the loan is 10 months. $72.50 is the amount of interest that accrues. We want to figure out what the principal amount is. So we're kind of using the formula in reverse this time rather than figuring out what interest is. We know what the interest is. We want to figure out what the original principal amount was. So we're going to use the same formula. The only difference is when we plug in values, 72.50 is going to go in for I, for interest. The variable is going to be the principal, P. The interest rate is 0.029. Again, 2.9% written in as a decimal. And then for the time, again, we want to write down, because it's less than a year, the fraction of a year. So that's 10 months out of 12 possible months. So 10/12 is what we use for our time. Now we have a little mini equation that we need to solve. So if we move the fraction over, multiply both sides by 12 over 10, that'll get us the next step in the equation. Then divide both sides by 0.029. And what we come up with then is an amount of $3,000. So the amount that Paul borrowed was $3,000. Again, if the interest rate is 2.9% and he borrows it for 10 months, he would end up paying the $72.50 in interest, and you're good to go. Okay? So again, with all of these problems, make sure that you always check to see what the question is asking about, so that way we are sure to answer the question correctly in terms of what they're asking for in the problem. But it all goes back to the simple interest formula. So again, one of those formulas that you want to probably memorize and have on the tip of your brain ready to go whenever you need to, and you'll be in good shape. Let's do one more example problem involving simple interest. So again, we have a situation where money is being borrowed. So Sam borrows $2,000 for 180 days, 6% simple interest. On day 45, he makes a partial payment of $500. Okay, so what we want to do is, assuming ordinary interest, so again, the 360 days in a year, we want to figure out what the balance due is when it comes to maturity. So again, the key thing here is Sam made a partial payment. He paid a little bit towards that, so that's going to reduce the principal and ultimately influence how much he's going to have to pay back when all is said and done. All right, so we've got our simple interest formula. So the first thing we want to do is we want to calculate how much interest has accrued through the first 45 days. Okay, because that's when he made the partial payments. We want to figure out how much interest has been accrued up to this point, because that's going to get paid off first before any principal is paid off. So to calculate the interest, we use the simple interest formula, 2,000 times 0.06, 6% written as a decimal, and again, 45 out of 360 since it's ordinary interest. And so we get interest of $15. So what that means is when you start looking at what is being paid, of the $500 that Sam paid, $15 of that is going to go towards that interest that has accrued. So what's going to happen is $485 is going to be applied to the ending, or to the balance that is still out there in terms of principal. Okay? So if I take $2,000 times 480 or minus $485, the balance now is $1,515. Okay? Now, what we've done is by making this partial payment, we've reduced the amount of principal. So now as interest continues to accrue, it's going to accrue on a smaller amount. Okay, so what we now need to do is, we're assuming that Sam's not making any more payments until maturity, until the loan is due. So we're going to recalculate the remaining amount of interest. So we're using the new balance, 1515, still at 6%, so we use the 0.06, and there's 135 days still left on the loan. Again, there were 180 days total. The first payment came at 45 days, so there's 135 days left. So there are the values we need to plug in, do the calculations, multiply these values together. And so the additional interest that is added in is $34.09. So now to figure out how much Sam needs to pay at maturity, which again means when the loan is due, we're going to take and add the principal amount, which is $1,515, plus the interest that accrued, so $1,549.09. So that is the amount that Sam is going to owe the bank in order to settle the loan and clear his debt. So when you look at a problem like this, it gets kind of complicated because there's lots of steps involved, but it definitely illustrates the advantage when you have a loan of making payments along the way, because making payments helps to reduce the principal, helps to cover the interest that accrues, and ultimately will save you money in the long run, as opposed to waiting to the very end of the loan to pay off the balance, the maturity value of that particular loan. All right, so there you go. Those were several examples that involve simple interest. The simple interest formula, I equals PRT, is relatively simple in terms of what you have to do. It just involves basically multiplication and potentially division, depending on what you're solving for. And doing problems that involve calculating the interest or the principal itself, once you get things in the right spot, fairly straightforward for finding the answer that you need to. The situation with partial payments, though, can be a little bit trickier because there's a lot of little steps along the way, so you got to really keep track of where you're at in that process. But hopefully the example that we shared in this video made sense and gave you some insight into how to calculate situations, like I said, where partial payments are being made towards a simple interest loan situation. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. I am always happy to help you out. Just reach out to me and I'll be happy to go through some more examples and make sure that you're good to go. In the meantime, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video.